The first issue of topical issues is in the name of Deputy Éamon of Cuív, who wishes to discuss extending eligibility for the Native Woodland Grant to lower yield classes. And we have Minister Andrew Doyle with us. Now, Deputy O'Cuív, the floor is yours.
First of all, I really appreciate the Minister of State coming in and taking this himself. And I know that he's a keen interest in land use type. We had a lot of discussions about that in the Agriculture Committee when he chaired that. And I also know that he has huge experience of the uplands. And I know that he's aware of the fact that before farming took over, uplands sustained forestry in their natural state. Now, Minister, the issue is this, and it's something that seems to be becoming prevalent with schemes that have been brought forward in housing, agriculture and so on, that the basic concept of the scheme is fantastic. We grow more woodlands, native species. But as you drill into the conditions, you find less and less people actually able to avail of the scheme. Now, the obvious thing is that people right throughout the state would like to grow hardwoods. And there are many people, particularly people with maybe not so good quality land, who would like to avail of the scheme. But the problem is that under the land type for the Forestration 2017 manual that applies to the Native Woodland Grant and Premium categories, I think they call it GPC 9 and 10, you cannot get the grant or the premium if the land is incapable of growing a crop of yield class 14 Sitka spruce. Now, I know that they use Sitka spruce as an indicator crop, but that's a highly commercial crop. But our reasons for planting hardwoods are way, way beyond commercial forestry. And I think the Minister would accept that the reasons that the state is so keen in native woodland is because of the habitat it provides from an ecological point of view, because in the long term the timber it provides, but not necessarily the most productive commercial timber crop, and because of the ecological advantages because of the carbon sequestration. And I think it's worthy of note that when you look at Norway and their policies, it would appear that they're much more willing to plant these uplands on the basis that they were naturally planted. Now, I suppose there's an irony in one case that came to me in that it's within 1.5 miles of the biggest timber mill in the country. But be that as it may, it's still been excluded from this woodland grant. But the farmer, one farmer who raised this issue with me, but I know that this is a widespread problem, said that he had actually planted timber before and that he had alder that grew to 8 foot in 6 years. He had sown 20 years ago a softwood pine and it's at 35 foot. He had grown birch trees with success on land, small quantities, same land. And therefore, Minister, basically what I'm asking you to do is this. Go back and review the whole rules and say, what is the purpose of the scheme? Is it, as I've outlined, for the purpose of having more broad leaves, in other words, more hardwoods, for the ecology and for the habitat? And if it is, should we be putting a high commercial productivity on this, or should there be separate rules for native woodland hardwood species?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to thank the Deputy O'Cuív for his comments at the beginning and for raising this. He's right, this is a very important area. Native woodlands are perhaps the most complex and biodiverse habitats in the country. They range from ancient oak and ash woodlands, some of which are over 400 years old, to naturally emerging woodlands such as birchwood, colonising cutaway bog to recently planted woodlands. As well as representing reservoirs of biodiversity, these deliver other important ecosystem services such as water and soil protection, wider habitat linkage and carbon sequestration. Native woodlands have a significant economic potential too, as a source of quality hardwood, renewable energy and other wood and non-wood products, and as the basis for enterprises offering outdoor activities. In addition, native woodlands represent an invaluable resource for local communities to enjoy their local heritage. The Department operates a package of measures to encourage farmers and other landowners to create new native woodland and to restore existing native woodland. Under the 2014 to 2020 forestry programme, approximately 1,000 hectares of native woodlands have already been established. The programme also set a target of 1,950 hectares for native woodland restoration projects. A budget provision of almost 24 million for both of these initiatives has been set aside under the programme. Two grant and premium categories, as the Deputy has said, in the current forestry programme 2014 to 2020 are specifically targeted at native woodland establishment. These planting categories attract the highest grant and premium rates of all categories under the Department's afforestation scheme. The mid-term review of the forestry programme completed early last year increased these rates even further in order to encourage more landowners to plant native trees. The premium is now paid each year for 15 years at a rate of €665 per hectare. In 2018, a total of 374 hectares of new native woodland has been planted, which represents a 38% increase over the previous year and is 83% of target. These forests will become a long-lasting feature of the landscape, providing environmental benefits on an ongoing basis and adding colour and diversity to an area that can be enjoyed by local people and visitors alike. Also, during 2018, my department introduced a new measure called the Woodland Environment Fund. This initiative provides an opportunity for businesses to partner with the government and Irish landowners to get behind the national effort to plant an additional 5,000 native trees between now and 2020. Under the fund, businesses can be associated with individual native woodlands and use the environmental benefits linked to these forests to demonstrate that they are meeting their corporate social responsibilities. And I can report that there has been considerable interest from corporate Ireland in this initiative, and I am confident that this will result in the establishment of additional new native woodlands. Finally, with regard to extending the eligibility criteria for establishing native woodlands to include land associated with lower yield classes, I suppose just to explain, yield classes are 14 is the number of metres a particular plantation will grow per annum across that. So every tree involved is divided, I suppose, to put it simply in arithmetic terms. But my concern will be that this land may not support, and I emphasise the word may not support native tree species. Suitable sites must be capable of supporting the vigorous growth and sustainable long-term development of these native trees based on minimal site preparation and inputs. Recent increases in afforestation levels for native woodlands demonstrate the positive impact existing measures are having on this planting category. And in this regard, the Department will continue to promote the establishment of native woodlands through the afforestation scheme.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Cuív.
Minister, I know what you just said there in the end, but when you actually look at the figures, 374 hectares of native woodland is not going to have a huge impact on either on producing more high-value nature areas, all this great biodiversity, etc. So, whereas I welcome the 374 hectares, when you spread that across the total country, it's of absolutely minuscule impact. Now, what you're basically doing, or what your department are basically doing, are excluding huge swathes of the country for farmers of land that's not very productive. It's not very productive for sheep, it's not very productive for cattle, it's not very productive for whatever. but it has to be put to some use, because land let go wild, as you know, as a farmer, as a practical farmer on the uplands, is a disaster from an environmental point of view. And what you're kind of saying is, well, really, if it wasn't in sheep and it wasn't in cattle, we wouldn't allow them to put on it either, because they wouldn't be a high yield class. Now, my belief is that a lot of this land could be used for native. The farmer obviously won't get a massive economic return, but a lot of farmers in these circumstances are not expecting to get a massive return, but they need to get enough that the premium will give them to make it viable to plant these and to establish them for the very reasons that you outline in your very articulate submission. So I'd ask you one question, Minister. Will you go back and look at this? And when you look at it in the context of all the areas of the country that are now excluded from any forestry, because the SSE and NHA, we accept that, they're virtually excluded completely, and are now excluded because they don't have a yield class. And will you go and look at it and come back and say, disadvantaged areas need special measures?
Minister.
Just to clarify on the last point, some of the SACs that are, and also some of the water asset sensitive areas that where conifer plantations are not permitted, for some of those the only option actually is a native woodland scheme. So it's not quite true to say that, because I know in specifically our part of the country where asset sensitive water tests fail for conifers, you can actually, the only option is a native woodland scheme, and some people would say that that wouldn't be their preferred choice. The mid-term review also included an increase in the minimum number of broadleaves from 10 to 15% in every conifer plantation. And it's worth putting this on the record, must have at least 15% broadleaves. That's different again to native woodlands, but there are, I see sites up on Derrybawn in Glendalough which were cleared out of conifers and are now on the side of hills that are supporting certain species of broadleaves in terms of native woodland. I would suggest, in direct response to your question, that this programme runs to 2020. We're trying to roll the next programme, I'm going to say we, the department, in and harmonise it with the next CAP, so that many measures in the environmental pillar will actually be reflected. Forestry in many ways is the low-hanging fruit, and the best, you have various different standards and qualities that, say, conifers have regarding economic and carbon sequestration. Other areas in biodiversity that broadleaves are probably, and native woodlands in particular, have their advantages in, and we need to try and marry them. But going back to the basic point, is that if we look at soil type and see what can each soil, so I'm not an agronomist or a silviculture expert, but if land can support species that are native woodland, then it should be allowed. But I don't think an SAC necessarily precludes that from happening. It does prevent conifers, but it doesn't necessarily prevent broadleaves. Just to bear that in mind. Thank you,
Minister. Now,